David Fincher makes a lot of truly mind-bending movies, but the only one I think I'll never fully recover from is The Game. The Game is one of Fincher's most underrated films, and I can safely say that no movie has ever thrown me for so many loops, so many times. Much like Seven, the screenplay for this film is pretty incredible. Although not quite as engaging as Seven, The Game manages its intrigue incredibly well throughout the runtime, revealing, or in some cases not revealing, new things at exactly the right moments. There's never a moment in the film where I could be sure I knew what was going on. There were times that I thought I knew and that I'd seen enough Fincher to know what was going to go wrong, but it's pretty much impossible to actually understand. And to that end, it meant that the ending left me slightly unsatisfied. Nonetheless, the ending was incredibly impactful and threw yet another spanner in the works, but I personally wish it had been something slightly darker. As for the rest of the film, it works really well. There are few other movies that have left me wanting answers more than this one. It's something that I really appreciate. More so, I appreciate that the game answers these questions with more questions. Every piece of information that is let through the cracks in this film starts more theories, sparks more ideas, and asks more questions. Suddenly, what you knew doesn't matter, there are new things to consider, and on the whole, it makes the game a truly enthralling experience. One of the things I thought the game was going to be early on was a character study about Michael Douglas. I was under the impression that the film's consumer recreation service would be doing something to alter his worldview, which made sense for a while given the circumstances and socioeconomic position of his character, but it's not the case. Although not the entire focus of the film, Michael Douglas's Nick Van Horton is the film's center character, and he is pretty much the only one who isn't a throwaway. Which in the context of the film makes sense, so don't worry about that. But it was interesting to see Nick's reactions to the things that were happening, what attitudes were carrying over from his life as an investment banker, and what was being adapted. The evolution of his character was something that I kind of saw coming from the beginning, but this didn't make it any less interesting to me because of how Michael Douglas played the character, and how the film shaped his relationships with other characters. The only thing I didn't really like about the characters in this film, or rather something I found to be confusingly unrealistic, was the relationships that Nick formed with the people around him. It's hard to explain why, but the throwaway characters that I mentioned before have a reason for being like that, but because of this, it kind of boggles my mind that Nick could relate to any of them at all after the events of the film. This is also one of the reasons I didn't particularly enjoy the final scene. I also don't know if David Fincher was the right director for this film, which he has also said himself. While what he does with the style of the game is impactful and works well overall, the kind of story that this film presents possibly requires a more overt style. Fincher's usual subtlety isn't exactly lost on the game, more so than it kind of seems boring. I didn't really find the visuals of this film to be all that interesting, and I can see why certain things were chosen for certain times, and many of the shots were very well framed for impact and emotion, but it seemed like something that belonged more in Gone Girl than it did in this film. The omnipresent style filmmaking that David Fincher is known for doesn't quite mesh with the game. What I personally would have preferred more based on the plot is if there was some kind of reality TV aesthetic to it. Something that made the audience feel like they were watching things happen live. Having said that, I really feel the need to stress that the game is still a very well-made movie. Without the extra punch of style in the film, it still manages the visuals in such a way that they reveal things very subtly, as well as have the right things show up at the right moments. The one thing that good movies do that will never lose its value to me is having something small but recognizable appear in a shot at some point, and it's something that this film nails. Watch out for company names that have the initials CRS. On top of that, the music and sound design in this film are pretty great. It helps set up the sense of intrigue that follows the game like a shadow. The sound design makes good use of other people's conversations and other sounds throughout the world of the film to portray the feelings of Nick to the audience. Certain things pique his interest, and it's a great addition that sometimes rather than watch Nick notice these things, the audience can notice for themselves simultaneously. It's also things like this that make me think a more reality TV-like style would have been a great addition for this film. Anyhow, I've read a lot that The Game is David Fincher's weakest film, and if that is the case, then that only further confirms that he is a genius, because for a worst effort, this movie is pretty damn good. The Game?
8 out of 10.